The observation deck of the Frontier's Edge research station hummed with its usual ambient noise, life support systems, data processors, and the occasional chirp of communication relays. Jessica sat cross-legged on her bunk, running her brush through her long auburn hair in smooth, methodical strokes. It was her evening ritual, a small piece of earth she carried with her across the stars. What she didn't notice at first were the 6 pairs of luminescent eyes watching her from the ventilation grate. The Kirnathi cubs had escaped their enclosure again. Louis would be furious when he found out, but the xenobiologist was currently 3 decks down, cataloging sample data. The cubs, each no larger than a terrier but infinitely more dangerous in their adult form, had discovered that humans were endlessly fascinating creatures. Jessica hummed softly, a melody from her childhood, as she worked through a particularly stubborn knot. The brush glided through her hair, separating each strand with practiced ease. Behind the grate, the cubs chittered to each other in their high-pitched language, their reptilian faces pressed against the metal slats. One of them, the boldest, whom Louis had designated as Specimen K7, but Jessica secretly called Patches due to the irregular scales on his back, squeezed through the grate. His siblings followed, their sinuous bodies flowing like liquid shadow across the deck plating. Jessica finally noticed them when Patches jumped onto her desk, his tail knocking over her water container. "Oh, hello there, little ones," she said, setting down her brush. "Does Louis know you're out?" The cubs surrounded her, their heads tilting in that peculiar way that suggested they were processing something complex. Patches reached out with a 3-fingered claw and gently touched her hair, his nictitating membranes blinking rapidly. "You like this?" Jessica smiled, picking up her brush again. She demonstrated slowly, pulling it through her hair from root to tip. "It's called brushing. Keeps everything neat and tangle-free." The cubs watched with an intensity that would have been unnerving if Jessica hadn't spent the last 3 months studying their species. The Kirnathi were apex predators on their homeworld, with intelligence that rivaled dolphins and problem-solving abilities that had shocked the xenobiology community. But they were also remarkably young. These cubs were barely 6 months old, still learning about their world. Patches scurried back to his siblings. They formed a tight circle, their tails intertwining as they communicated through a combination of chirps, posture, and the bioluminescent patterns that flickered across their scales. Then, as if reaching a collective decision, they dispersed. Each cub grabbed their own tail in their claws. Jessica's eyes widened as she realized what they were attempting. "Oh no, wait." Too late. The cubs began dragging their claws through their tails in imitation of her brushing motion. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Their tails, covered in fine, backward-facing scales designed to sense vibrations and changes in air pressure, caught on their claws. Within seconds, 3 of the cubs had tangled their tails into knots. Another had somehow managed to loop his tail around his own leg. Patches, in an ambitious attempt to be thorough, had enlisted a sibling to brush his tail for him, resulting in both of them becoming hopelessly entangled. The chirping turned to distressed squeals. Okay, everyone calm down." Jessica set aside her brush and moved toward them, hands outstretched in a placating gesture. "Let me help." The cubs froze at her approach, their predatory instincts warring with their confusion. In their natural state, adult Kirnathi would never allow such vulnerability. But these were cubs, and Jessica had spent months earning their trust through patience and treats of synth meat. She knelt beside Patches first, speaking in a soothing tone. "Easy there, little hunter. Let's get you sorted out." Her fingers worked carefully through the tangled scales, finding the points where they'd locked together. The cub's scales were surprisingly delicate, designed more for sensory input than protection at this age. She had to be gentle, speaking constantly to keep them calm. You see, you can't brush scales the same way I brush hair, she explained, even though they probably couldn't understand her words. Hair is different. It's soft, and it grows from follicles in our skin. Your scales are hard, and they overlap. They're not meant to be brushed at all. By the time Lewis arrived 20 minutes later, summoned by the station's AI, when it detected unusual bio-signs in Jessica's quarters, he found a remarkable scene. Jessica sat in the center of the floor, surrounded by 6 Kirnathi cubs. Each one was calm, watching intently as she demonstrated on a small section of synthetic fur she'd replicated from the station's 3D printer. They got out again, Louis said flatly, though Jessica could hear the amusement hidden in his voice. They were trying to learn, Jessica replied without looking up. They saw me brushing my hair and wanted to try it themselves. Louis crouched down, his scientific curiosity overtaking his annoyance. Tool use through observation and imitation. That's remarkable. The Kirnathi Council insisted their young couldn't learn complex behaviors without adult instruction. Maybe they just needed the right teacher, Jessica said, smiling as Patches gently touched the soft brush she'd given him, this time simply examining it rather than trying to use it on himself. Or maybe, Louis countered, pulling out his data pad to record notes, humans just have a way of making everyone around them want to be better. Even predators. Jessica laughed. Is that your scientific hypothesis, Dr. Chen? Call it the humanity effect, he said, watching as one of the cubs carefully mimicked Jessica's gentle stroking motion on the synthetic fur. We don't just survive among the stars. We teach others how to thrive, even if it means untangling a few tails along the way. The cubs chirped their agreement, or perhaps their hunger. It was feeding time, after all. But as Jessica and Louis herded them back toward their enclosure, she couldn't help but notice how they moved differently now, more confident, more curious, more human, in the ways that truly mattered.